All right, ladies and gentlemen, today's other guest is joining us along with Mr. Charles Rees of the network. We're joined by Mr. David Grubb. David, how are you doing today?
I'm doing well. Glad to be with you guys.
Glad to have you on. And I felt like, and Charles hit me up about this because we wanted to continue our conversation on the 148th episode is when post the George Floyd murders. And we wanted to continue having conversations of what can we do to progress this world? What's going on? How can we enlighten some of the younger listeners who are here with us? And we all had a conversation of what we thought was going on was wrong. And I feel if we can talk about all the stuff going on in pop culture, if we can talk about different people getting together in relationships, we should be able to talk about this. And I'm glad to have you on today, being that you're someone who is not only a part of the African-American community, but you're someone who's older than everybody who's talked on this podcast, and you're someone who's experienced more than us. So I want to ask you, my first question is just, what's your overall thoughts on what's going on in this country today based upon these murders that were experienced between Ahmaud Arbery, George Floyd, and Breonna Taylor, which has led up to the protests, which led up to the different rallies and the different things of us trying to accomplish different things to stop systematic oppression and just to stop police from killing us and the whole defund the police movement. What's your thoughts on everything that's going on right now? Just overview before we zoom in.
Yeah, let me give you my background in this because the way I was raised really shaped how I think about these things today. My mother is a native of Birmingham, Alabama, and her friends were in the church that was bombed in Birmingham. She was an attendee at that funeral. The documentary Four Little Girls, if you have not seen it, you should. It's done by Spike Lee. My godmother appears in that documentary to discuss that event. So, that part of my childhood, I understood those things from my mother, from my grandparents in Birmingham. My father was born in Michigan and raised in Port Arthur, Texas, which experienced his own different type of racism, where he saw Mexicans being treated as if they were white, while the black kids were treated, segregated. And that created, a whole different dynamic there for him. My parents go to college, and that's where they meet, is in college. Two kids from the South meeting in Minneapolis, Minnesota, at a small liberal arts school there, where the black population was less than 3% of the school, but they're there in the mid to late 60s. And, of course, they lived through the riots. They lived through the Black Power movement. And so I was born in Detroit, Michigan. We moved to New Orleans when I was about 4 years old. By the time I was in high school, my parents had me reading, autobiography of Malcolm X, Soul on Ice. I knew who W.B. Du Bois was. I had read the Up From Slavery, History of Black Folk and Black People in America. I was always given the information, Why We Can't Wait by Martin Luther King Jr. I visited the King Center. I had been to parts of Virginia where I knew that my ancestors, the Grubb family, because that ain't no name that you just have, I have been to those places and seen where that's part of my family came from. So I was always aware. And then I grew up through the Rodney King beatings. I grew up through, the LA riots. I went through, all those, just the constant, the different people, the, Amadou Diallo in New York. I remember those things vividly. So this was a constant. So to watch it now, and to see it come again, you are often, as a Black person, I think you get two feelings. One is, yes, maybe this is the one where we break through. And then the second part is, I've seen this, we've raised our voices, and they shut it down. And they pretend that we made a little bit of progress. You get some cursory things, some deck chairs get moved, but we really didn't get any further. And so, it's for me in that perspective, having seen and read and just being taught my entire life what the history of this country has been, you're constantly torn. You're constantly torn as to whether you can believe that things are going to get better or looking at history and saying, man, I'm really tired of baby steps.
Yeah, and that's something. It's funny that you mentioned the tertiary things on the side, things that are given to kind of appease the moment, because you can look at things like the Aunt Jemima syrup or certain streets getting changed the name of, and that's something that we see is happening already. What do you think, before we dive into it, what do you think led up to it? Because it kind of seemed like, and I don't want to say this and make this sound insensitive, but it's just from, like you said, we've seen this happen in history before. What do you think made this point in this moment kind of boil over, because it happened so fast?
I think that the way, the manner in which George Floyd died, the fact that the time that it took, everything that he said while he was dying, you know, when a person calls out for their dead mother.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? Like, and I also think that the great benefit, and I had an awesome conversation about this with Mahmoud Abdul-Rauf, the great benefit of social media, and social media can be a positive, and we know how shitty it can be out there.
Yeah.
But in this moment, not only were all of us as Black Americans connected in that moment and saying, we know that pain. We know, if you don't know death in that regard, you know somebody, or you have been through that same type of feeling that somebody is stripping you of your humanity. But I think that there are enough people who, just as human beings, something had to break through in a way that you couldn't say. You couldn't be like, well, Rodney King was drunk.
Yeah.
You know, whatever. It's like when the story is, it's over a counterfeit $20 bill. That's what this man died over. You know, everything else people could kind of play two sides. With Trayvon Martin, they wanted to play two sides. With the young man who died
Sterling in Baton Rouge.
Everybody wanted to play, oh, well, he's selling loose cigarettes on the street, or this dude is doing that, or he's got a toy gun, or you couldn't play both sides of this for a man having his knee on another man's neck for 8 minutes and 48 seconds, and you watching the life leave his body. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Like, you cannot other side that. And I think that, because that's why people are ignoring Breonna Taylor. That's why people are ignoring Breonna Taylor. We didn't watch Breonna Taylor get shot 8 times. And we didn't even, you know, we've seen enough of this. We've seen just, you know, the cop in Dallas who went into the wrong apartment and shot the dude eating ice cream. We're not talking about that anymore.
Yeah.
You know, those types of these no-knock warrants and people getting murdered. We're not talking about that because we didn't see it. But for George Floyd, we saw it. And I hope that that's one of the things too, is I don't want the Breonna Taylors to get forgotten. Same. I don't want the you know, we do this and we start saying how hard it is to be a Black man in America. And it is, you know, it is. But it's just as hard, if not harder, for Black women.
Black women, yes, sir.
And Black women in this regard. Black women have done the heavy lifting on these things. It was Black women that started the Black Lives Matter movement. You know what I'm saying? It was a group of Black women. Even the LGBTQ movement in this country was started by
Black trans
women.
Yes, sir.
So we have to make sure that their stories aren't forgotten in this too. And I think that's a struggle that we have too. America wants to try to just narrow it in and make it about feelings and not about systemic racism. And say, man, if we're all just nicer to each other, no. That's not how a system works. A system does not rely on your feelings. A system is a machine that keeps going whether you want it to or not.
Yeah.
And that's what we're talking about here is, and I don't want ever have the conversation hijacked and talk about how we need to love each other. I don't need everybody to love me. I don't even need you to like me. But I do need you to treat me as an equal citizen under the law and respect me and my humanity. And that's all we're asking for. To make it about anything else is to intentionally miss the point.
No, I think you said that beautifully. Charles, if you wanted to go before I go again.
Well, a point to what David was bringing up is, in the past, it's like people just sit there and it's like they wait for this to just blow over. And that's what I've heard from people. And it's just people that they don't want to address the issues that's going on in this country. And it's something that we talked about when we sat down with the podcast is, David, I'm not sure if you knew this, but Lynden and I sat down and had this conversation 2 or 3 years ago. And we talked about how we're going to bring upon change, not only to the world, but we focused on our community. We thought if we can do something in our community, we can make a change. And I've told Lynden this, if I can change one person's viewpoint, if I can change one person's mind, I made a difference for that day. But that's the thing is if we can all do that day by day, we can change one person at a time. It's going to curb society. And I think that's what you're seeing right now is yes, there's a big thing about going on with Jamie Bashaw in Lafayette because he was sharing things. He shared something about all lives splatter and he lost his job. And people are saying there's no such thing as free speech. Hey, there's free speech, but don't believe that you can say free speech at the end of the day and not get judged in the eye of society right now. And that's what's changed in the past 3 to 4 years. Is society as a whole wants to move forward, wants to progress. And if this continues to go the way it's going, I think that we can see change. Are we anywhere close to where we need to be? I think y'all can agree with me and say, no, we're not. Do I think things are slowing down? Absolutely. That's why I wanted to have David on today, because I think David has been very good with his show and on social media and trying to make change. And I think that he's the perfect person to come on today and help us progress our efforts in terms of making change at the end of the day.
And I'll thank you for that first and foremost. And I think that I try to do it in 2 different ways. Yes, I am direct about the issues that I'm passionate about. But the big thing to me was like when I said I'm going to build this show, I'm not going to do it the way everybody else did it. Because, you get look, I mean, to be honest, sports radio is the dominion of white men. It is. I mean, it's 90+% white men. But even in that, I could have taken the approach and said, well, I'm going to just be insular in my show. And I'm going to make sure I do this. But you've been a repeated guest. You were a repeated guest on my show. And where a lot of people would say, man, these guys are too young, too inexperienced, whatever. No, you come on my show, you're prepared, you do your thing. I'm going to treat you as just like I would treat anybody else. I didn't look, I intentionally went after young, new people who had not gotten their chance to be on a larger platform. I intentionally brought on women who were not going to just speak about women's sports. I intentionally brought on people of color to talk about these things who hadn't gotten the exposure, because that's like how you say, if you don't present it as normal, that the world is that you can have people in these positions, then nobody's going to presume it. You know what I'm saying? They're going to view, you have to change it that way. You have to be active. And I think that that's the biggest thing now is that we're demanding that people not be passive supporters. You can't just say, I'm not a racist. You can't just say, I don't think that way. We're asking for action. And so for you to say, I'm an ally and I'm going to be active, that's the best thing you can be. Because if you're just saying, well, I'm cool because I'm not a racist, man, that's not enough, because I can't change it. Lynden can't change it because there's not enough of us. It's we're on the end of it. So when we speak about it, it's one thing, but when you speak up to people in your circle that you're around who say something or think something that we know is just wrong in the 21st century, it means more, because they view it at us from an angle of, why are you complaining? Mm-hmm. But when it comes from you, it's, man, no, this is family, and you're in that family. And unfortunately, it's got separated that way on purpose, that we have these different groups. And the only reason these groups exist is to divide. That was the whole reason these labels were put in place, to set an order. And now we're trying to break that. That's what we're really trying to do, is break that whole thing up and say, no, we are all trying to be good Americans here. We love America. To anybody to doubt Black folks' love of America is insane, because we've been fighting for everything in this country and for this country when we didn't get any of it back.
Mm-hmm. And I think I think that point is very true. And I think Charles can attest to this, and doesn't mind me saying this because we've talked about this, but with your example that you gave on the show with your doctor friend about how you because of your conversations, you've changed that one man's opinion, which thus is allowing him to change other people in higher positions' opinions as well. David, I want to ask you, in terms of certain things like defund the police, and in my opinion, I think some of the thing that we have to take out is qualified immunity. What's some of the things that you think should change so we can change some of the system and some of the things going on inside the system?
Okay, so there's really three things about it. You have to have criminal justice reform, you have to have economic justice reform, and you have to have educational justice reform. So when you talk about defund the police, I think people, first of all, when they hear that, they don't understand the concept. They don't understand what that really means. And the perfect example is in, I believe it's Paterson, New Jersey, if I'm correct. I may be wrong. It could be Newark, but in New Jersey, they were the first to do it. And what they did was they fired all the police officers and made them reapply for their jobs. And then they streamlined their duties. You weren't asking police officers to respond to loose dogs in the street. You weren't asking police officers to respond to mental health issues. You weren't asking them, armed response for things that did not need to be handled by police officers. And that's what defund the police is about, is that we have invested so much in this idea of criminality that we're not dealing with the issues that create it. And you can't arrest your way to safety. You know what I'm saying? Like that, it's not, putting people in jail does not make communities safer. Getting people jobs, getting people educated makes communities safer. But we don't deal with that because there are people who profit off of the prison system.
Yeah.
Sheriffs are the most powerful people in Louisiana outside of the governor.
They're more powerful. They're more powerful than the governor in Louisiana.
Yeah, basically, because a sheriff is a job for life, essentially. Unless you just don't want it anymore, or you screw up bad, it's a job for life. And you just walk in and put a blank thing on a sheet and say, "Give me my budget," and walk right back out. So, if those people have that kind of power without accountability. And that's all you ask for, too, as a citizen, is accountability for decisions about life and death. If you can't have accountability about those, and that's like you're talking about qualified immunity, where they try to make these things where unless there's precedent or you can prove that there was intent, then the officer's not responsible.
Yeah. That's
you created an impossible barrier for anybody to get justice in this situation. Why do we think that most officers don't get indicted, and when they do, 90+% of them never ever see jail time?
It's because of that.
That shouldn't make sense in any crime, in any court of law. You know what I mean? If you're fighting parking tickets and 90% of the people were walking out not paying their parking tickets, you'd say something was wrong in there.
Yeah.
So I mean, so then the economic part is redlining, housing discrimination, loan discrimination. You know what I'm saying? All these things that you have to deal with when you know that we can see on a daily basis that the facts are that a black person with a college degree earns less than a white person with a high school diploma. That makes no sense in this country. That is not the product of work. You know what I'm saying? That is not the product of pulling yourself up by the bootstraps. When you see black people with higher credit scores get lower loans or the worst loans than whites with lower credit scores, and that we know that that realtors do not show black people all of the houses that they are qualified for. Those forms of economic discrimination affect generational wealth. And that is that huge difference. The fact that a black family is basically going to have to work 1,000 years to match the generational wealth of a white family, which is obviously not possible mathematically. We have a problem. That's a structural problem in your economy. And then the educational piece, you create a system where education is funded on property taxes. So what happens when you had white flight in the late 70s and early 80s to the suburbs? You withdraw the tax base, you leave the undereducated and the underpaid in the city center, and now most of them are renters. So yes, property taxes go down, funding for schools go down.
And thus education goes down.
You cannot say you live in a decent society when a child's education is based on their zip code and who their parents happen to be. That is setting a child's life. If we're going to be a society that says, well, all these people who say, well, I'm pro-life, man, once the kid is here, you got to have the same type of fever for their life than before they got here. Don't sit here with this shit and tell me that you love life, but once they're here, you're saying you're on your own.
Yep.
It's like the people now that are saying, why are you protesting and rioting, law and order? But then at the same time, they're saying, you can't tell me to wear a mask.
Yeah.
It's like, how can you ask for law and order then when the doctors who know what they're talking about, and I'm not talking about our president, I'm talking about medical doctors who know what they're talking about, saying, wear a mask. And the biggest thing for me is, and I've been seeing this on Twitter, they would have said wearing a mask does better for you. More people would be wearing it. But it shows what society is like, because wearing a mask benefits others. And it just goes back to what we're trying to deal with right now. And look, David, my question for you is, and I brought this up to Lynden, is, and kind of said it earlier, is that if I can do one person at a time, it's a big thing for me. And what I said in our show that we talked to, where we opened this discussion a couple of weeks ago, was that to me, I can't focus on other issues before I figure out what I think is the bigger issue. And that's a lack of equality among us all as Americans, and not only as Americans in this world. Right. Yes. And so I'm not sure what your stance and take on that is that, do we have to fight that issue first before we can focus on smaller issues? Like, kind of going back to the thing of you can't change the world in one day. I can't change everyone's opinion in one day, but if I can get everyone to agree that we're all equal in each other's eyes, then maybe I can say, hey, this person that is part of the LGBTQ community is just as important as I am and should have the same rights. But to me, I can't focus on that, until I see that everyone as a whole is on the same playing field.
Like, the first thing that I think, the quickest things we can do to start leveling the playing field is make gerrymandering of districts illegal.
Yes.
That has to stop. And the second thing is abolish the Electoral College, because we are the only nation in the world that promotes one man, one vote in every election, except for the one for the most powerful office in the land. And we know the history of the Electoral College. If you want to look it up, please do. But it makes no sense that my vote in Louisiana
doesn't matter.
Essentially has not counted in my entire voting life. It has not counted. So I might as well never vote for president as long as I live in Louisiana, because I know what the outcome will be. And that makes no sense. It makes no sense that somebody in Idaho's vote is worth 6 times more than someone in California's is, because you want to say, well, that's where these people live. We're all Americans, right? If we're all Americans, it's not, you're picking the president of the country. I'm not picking the president of my state. That's the governor's office. And I vote for that person, one man, one vote. We don't do it by every district of the state. So it makes no sense. That alone is a vestige of systemic inequality. You are creating a system that does not bring it does not allow every voice to be heard. And if the basis of this country, one of the foundations, was no taxation without representation, well, certainly if my vote does not count for president, how can I be represented in the Oval Office?
No, 100%. I think you made a point going back to the 3 things that you think can make change. And I want to start off with the criminal change in the sense of, I think the sense of running inside of the house, the no-knock warrant, that's something that has to go. Qualified immunity, like we said, the chokehold situation is something that has to go. To get those things to go, do you feel that it has to start at getting people in office from a local level and then expanding outward into getting them in positions to where they can make change on a federal level? How do you think we go about getting those criminal changes to take place?
Yeah, do we start at the bottom or do we go from the top?
Top up.
Like,
yeah,
it's
exactly.
always think globally, act locally. You know what I'm saying? We can do the groundwork here, but that doesn't mean we're not focused on what's happening nationally, because that's where the power in numbers comes. Because there are like-minded people throughout the country, and now in this age, we can connect with each other so much better and organize to make change on the national level and put pressure on people. Now I can access congressmen who don't live in my district and put pressure on them. You know what I'm saying? So you want to act locally, because that's where I exactly know I can, the biggest thing is young people need to understand this. Vote all the way down the ballot. Everything matters. voting for judges matter, voting for, coroners matter. All those things matter. And a lot of times you see ballot fatigue. You vote for the top positions that and then you don't vote on the bills. You don't vote on these lower positions because you say, well, I'm never going to work. I'm never going to be in a judge's court. I'm not a criminal. So I'm not worried about who's the judge in that criminal court. What is that person like? You know what I'm saying? And maybe we need to evaluate, should judges be an elected position? You know what I mean? Those are things that we have to start talking about and affecting locally. In Louisiana, we can address with the governor's office, hey, we need to minimize the power of sheriffs. We need to rein them in. That's something that can be done, if not nationally. We can start that conversation here in Louisiana.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So those things can be done locally. It's about empowering folks and getting them to understand those issues, because it's really only two segments of the population that every election rides on. Voters over 65, because they show up for everything.
Everything.
They get bust.
You know what I'm saying?
My grandparents have not missed an election ever.
Once you get your AARP card,
you're guaranteed to vote.
You are voting. And then that other group that counts is that group 25 and under. Do they show up? And that's the thing. Every time, if they show up, they can swing any election.
Look at 2008.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's a great example of the younger generation voting. And Obama did such a good job of not only the grassroots campaign in terms of financially supporting his campaign, but getting the young vote out was huge for Obama. I mean, to me, that's why he won in 2008.
Yeah, I mean,
it shows that the young generation has a voice.
Because you consume everything differently. Where we viewed, not me, I mean, I guess where the nation has viewed the president, and you see it now, the way people talk about that, the side of the people who say things like, well, all these statues are sacrosanct, this flag is sacrosanct, the position is sacrosanct. Well, over the last 20 years or so, that challenge has been brought up that these things that you talk about are sacred are in the hands of us. It's in the hands of we no longer have to turn over the idea of what is right and wrong to the past. You know what I mean? And I think that there's a generation that said these things were already decided. You know, in no society have I seen greater reverence for dead people who thought of something 200 years ago. You wouldn't put up doctors from 200 years ago and still be talking about they were the height of medicine. You know what I mean? Like philosophies, ideologies advance, they develop. And I think young people are always the ones who push society forward because they dare to ask the questions. There's a certain age in life where you start protecting yourself. You're thinking about your children, you're thinking about retirement, you're thinking about all those things. But there's a point in your life where you ask all the questions and you demand some answers. And that's where people 25 and under in particular are important. Even if you're not getting the answer, the very asking of the question is so important.
Yeah, no, 100%. Charles, I want to ask you, and then we can expand it out to David, because he brought up the statues, and we talked about this a little earlier in the show. And I definitely feel like this is a distraction, but it's something that needs to be discussed, and it's something that needs to take place. How do you feel about the idea of these Confederate statues going down? My thought process is, number one, they were traitors to this country and war criminals. So those statues should be taken down on that premise alone, because if we have a problem with Kaepernick kneeling because that's unpatriotic, to me, those statues are unpatriotic and un-American, first off. And then secondly, their ideas of racism and slavery come second to me, if I want to argue that point. How do you feel about these statues? And then we'll open it up to David to respond as well.
I mean, isn't the idea of not only statues, but military bases being named after Confederate generals an issue when you have African Americans that train at those bases? I mean, Lynden, you and I have a good friend in JJ who's in the Army now.
Yep.
Who's been at some of those bases that are named after Confederate generals. I mean, that in itself is an issue. I guess the question is, and there needs to be an understanding is, I mean, do we go all the way to like the Washington Monument? Do the things that our forefathers need to come down in terms of that? You know, I think that's a discussion for down the road, but why can't we just get these Confederate statues moved? Why can't we get these names removed? And yes, you know, the question that people bring up is, what does that do? You know, do we forget about history? Well, do I really need to forget about or remember a period of history that lasted shorter than Outcast? I'm not sure if you saw that on Twitter, but it's true, you know? Like how the most important part about that history was the sadness. And
to me, that's what museums are for.
That's what that's what museums are for. But then it goes to the point of, and I'm not sure if I saw you retweet this, Lynden, or David has tweeted this out, but I've seen this on Twitter, that go to school, look through the books, and tell me how much African-American history you get out of school.
And it's funny because before we get David to chime in, our history teacher, Mr. Rosen, and I know he wouldn't mind me saying this, but he contacted me a couple days after after we did our episode, and he was like, let me know what you think about how we taught Black history. And we went to, just to let you know, David, we went to a private school and we took these AP history classes and whatnot. And I know the AP board said they want to add more African-American history. And he asked me about how my school taught Black history and how we could improve on that. And that's something that I know that at least with my school, they're trying to change that. And that's something that I think is intriguing, because even though we went to a school that tried to give the best education to us as possible, that side of history wasn't taught as much.
And it's small steps, right? That's a small step. Removing a Confederate statue, that's a small step.
Yeah.
And it's easy. And, renaming a street, that's an easy thing to do. How many streets are named after African Americans that have been important to our history, other than MLK Street?
And
MLK
that's always
Boulevard.
in the Black area of town, always.
And go watch the movie about NASA, about how America got to the moon, and realize who got America.
3 Black women.
Who got America to the moon. How many streets are named after those ladies?
None.
I don't know any of them,
And the thing is, when people talk about history is a movable thing as well. It is based on perspective. And
yes, it's based on the victors.
It's based on perspective, but you get two perspectives. There's two types, because all they say is history is like you said, written by the victors, and then also history changes how we view figures as we get further and further away from them. First of all, we know that most of these Confederate statues were erected for a purpose. The stories are public, that they were put up intentionally to provoke. They were to intimidate. They were built cheaply and quickly long after the Confederacy was gone. There are Confederate statues in Pennsylvania. Okay, there are Confederate statues in states that had nothing to do with the Confederacy. These were done intentionally. They were not about history. And the lies of the whole lie that we talked, that I'm sure you guys have touched on before with the Confederacy, of that it was about states' rights. Yes, it was the states' rights to have slaves. It's in every single secession document. It's like, it's history. That's the United States, the most powerful nation in the world that we love to talk about, is one of the least historically educated in the world. You know what I'm saying? Like, of civilized, so-called civilized countries, we're horribly educated in all the things that we say we're great at. We don't know our own history. Immigrants who come into this country know more about the structure of this country than we do. You know what I'm saying? That citizenship test, I guarantee you, if you walk down the street and handed it to 20 people on the street, most of them would fail. Mm-hmm. And it wouldn't be close. It wouldn't be like 70s. We're talking about like 30s and 40s if lucky. So, we have a terrible understanding of history in this country. And we have there is a view that the history of this country has to fit under the narrative of white Americans. Everything else comes from underneath that. It starts there, and everything else has to squeeze its way and get pushed into that. That's why you don't see a lot about women. That's why you don't see a lot about the native peoples who were here. You don't see a lot about blacks. It's because they otherize all of those things. The history of this country is told through the perspective, and this isn't a radical thought. If somebody's going to see this and be like, man, this dude is, this isn't a radical, these are all things you can read. You know what I'm saying? Like, this is, the history of society is written through the eyes of white men. And then you understand why, because that's what it was built. Those were the people who had access to those things.
And to the knowledge. Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? That's who wrote it. So, yeah. So when you get to this point of challenging the educational system and making sure that the books are right, Texas has control of the textbook industry in this country because they order more textbooks than anyone else. And they determine what's in the books. So they've done things like change the word slave to unpaid laborer. That changes history. That is the change of history, not taking down some statue. That's changing history is literally in what you're teaching these kids. And so most of these people out here fighting, what they're not talking about is about statues. They know they're not arguing about statues. What they're arguing about is the order of life as they knew it. And it's not about history, it's about their discomfort. And people who are change is always uncomfortable. Change is always uncomfortable, or otherwise it wouldn't be change. But you have to go through it to get better. And a lot of people just don't want to be better because it's scary. It's scary to admit that the world is bigger than your block. It's scary to admit that the people that you have an idea of are just the same as you, that there's nothing to be frightened of, really, that they just want the same things you want. I have never met a human being who didn't want the same basic things I know. Didn't we all learn the basic hierarchy of needs? You know what I'm saying?
We did.
The basic hierarchy of needs, I need food, shelter,
water,
love, and company. That's basic. I mean, if those things are met, people are happy. And so that's all we're all fighting for. That's all we are fighting for, is that space. If you say you believe in those things, then we know that in the public square, we got to be more considerate of each other. And if things are intentionally damaging and hurting to people, you grow up and you change. If somebody came in your house and they were offended by something and they're your guest, are you going to tell your guest, get out of my house? Or are you going to say, let me make you comfortable here in my place because I invited you in? You know what I'm saying? And I think that's where we have to get to as a country, is like, you can't be open and say we're this melting pot, but every time something try to melt, you're trying to push the flavor out. You know what I'm saying? Like, it has to change the flavor. You want it to melt, but taste the exact same. That's not possible.
No, 100%.
And going back to what you were asking too, and the point I was, trying to get across is, I sit there and have conversation with people and like that doctors group I was telling you about, I've seen more and more where people are stepping up. But the thing I've been seeing lately is, people are taking the way left and the way right of what's going on, whether it be with social issues or the coronavirus right now. And that's their selling point. That's their talking point. What they don't understand and what they need to do is listen to our conversation, listen to what we want. We're fighting for equality at the end of the day. And the fact that that's so hard to grasp, it just shows that people are so stuck in their ways that they don't want to move off of it. And look, change, like David said, is hard. There's no easy way to go through change. We've all been through it. It's part of life. But as a society, we all have to go through change together. And look, it's starting to happen, but it still has a lot of work to go. And my big thing with these statues is that it's a little bit of change, but it's a change in the right direction.
Oh, 100%.
It's so easy. That's the thing, is it doesn't cost hardly anything to just, people say all of them don't belong in the museum because they're sitting there talking about, well, these are great works of art. No, some of these are just cheap pieces of crap that they got put up just to have it up there. So let's not talk about that as art. And a museum is not just a place if we're not going to tell the story, then don't put it in a museum. You know what I'm saying? Like, if we ain't going to tell the story and what these people really were. And there has to be some evaluation. There has to be some reckoning. You know what I mean? We can't keep telling the story of George Washington with wooden teeth when we know good and dang well that he ripped the teeth out of slaves and put them in his mouth. Like that, the myth is not more important than the truth. And just because the truth makes uncomfortable, just because the truth hurts, doesn't mean you shouldn't know it. And that doesn't make you, I think it makes the country stronger to deal with the uncomfortable truths. You know what I'm saying? To deal with those, it makes us stronger because in your life, the people who love you the most are the ones who tell you when you fuck up.
Yeah, to be honest with you.
And they're honest with you and say, you fucked up, it's time to do better. If you don't love somebody, you just let them go on that path. But that's the whole thing. If you truly love your country, you're honest about it. You say, I want this to be the best country it can be. Because if you say it already is, you can't get any better. You know what I'm saying? It can't get any better. And if you think it can't get any better, then what are we in this for? It's the same reason with you doing your show. You do your show every day. Every time you get on that mic, you say, I'm doing a better show than I did last time. I want to be tighter. I want to stutter less, whatever. The day you feel like you've made it, that you've done the perfect show, you are fucking worthless.
Mm-hmm.
Yep. No, 100%. I want to ask you, being that you're a guy who is in the sports sector, and Charles said something that I really think is true. The idea that we're always politicizing these issues instead of listening to what the actual message is about. When Colin Kaepernick was talking about police brutality, it was brought to the flag. And we saw that happen again with Drew Brees, being that you're a guy in the New Orleans sports sector. How did you feel about Drew Brees' comments and then about his apologies and then I'll say his attempting to learn and understand? How did you feel about that whole saga of what took place a couple of weeks ago?
Hey, first, nobody should have been surprised that Drew Brees said what he said. He said it before. It's like it wasn't new news. It was just he was reiterating something that he had said before. And a long time ago, and I got a lot of flack for it. As I said, Drew Brees has been problematic on a number of views. You know what I mean? Like when he was attached to focus on the family, that was a problem, but nobody wanted to acknowledge it. And they let Drew Brees slide on that when he said, I didn't know what they were about, though he had a 10-year relationship with them. Yeah. You know what I'm saying? So it's like, for that, I wasn't surprised. I knew his politics. He's a registered Republican. You know, I mean, like, he voted for Trump. What did you expect him to say?
Yeah.
What I was insulted by was the fact that all of a sudden in an 8-hour span, you get an epiphany. Nothing happens that fast in life.
And that's what me and Charles were saying about how we would rather him not apologize and then actually take action to try to take action to show he truly changed.
And it kind of bothered me too that he was like, you know, like a spurned girlfriend or something, or a dude who's and it's saying, well, look into my eyes and see how much this hurts me. Again, you are centering this on your feelings. Like same way when Brittany Reeves put out her statement, it was about, well, we've gotten death threats and people have been mean to us. I'm sorry, baby. You know what I'm saying? Like, this is what we've been living with.
Yeah.
You got it for a day and it's breaking your heart. Get it for a lifetime. You know what I'm saying? Like, don't make it you-centered. It has to be about what this is about. You know what I'm saying? Don't make the issue about you. It's never about you. It's about the bigger issue. And so I think that part bothered me. I'm holding everybody who said anything, myself included, accountable for what we're saying today. If you're not going, everybody can say something right now. There's going to be more commercials. There's going to be more pledges, like you said, more gestures of name changes. It's the slight things like that. But when I want to see my thing is, okay, well, let's see what Drew Brees does in November. You know what I'm saying? Like when Drew Brees goes to the ballot box, he's going to tell me what he really thinks. If Drew Brees takes his ass up to Baton Rouge and goes speak to some legislators and says, we need reforms on this and uses influence that way because Drew Brees has access to every room in this state. You know what I'm saying? If he wants to get in somewhere, somebody's going to take 10 minutes to talk to Drew Brees.
Yes.
Use your power that way. When you do it when you start doing those things, when Gail Benson says, instead of putting together this little coalition to talk about stuff, I'm going to actually be about stuff and go to these places and do something in that regard, then we got something to talk about. But you cannot, again, this is not a problem that will be solved by providing some money. You know what I mean?
That's my biggest thing. That is my biggest thing. When people that are wealthy throw money at a problem just so they can get the social issues away from them, I want to see action. Look, do I think that Brees has taken some steps towards the right direction? I do think he has. But like you said, come November, I want to see that. I want to see continued change. Look, we all know Demario Davis and what he's been fighting for in this state for the past 2 years, justice reform. And like you said, Drew Brees can go to Baton Rouge.
Yeah, he can.
He can make phone calls. If Drew Brees is asking for justice reform, how long do you think it's going to take for that to actually happen?
If he stands on the floor of the Louisiana legislature and gets a speech, because we've seen plenty of people come in and just give random speeches in front of the legislature.
Hurricane Chris did it. He can do it, you know?
Stand right there and say, look, enough is enough. These things need to happen. The pressure's going to be there because nobody wants to be on the wrong side of Drew Brees. You know what I'm saying? Like, if you say, anytime I have ever criticized him, people are coming to kill me. Yes. So as a football player alone, let alone touch him as a person. So if he goes out there and uses his weight to do that, if Gail Benson, who is the richest, most powerful person in this state, if she were actually out there doing that, I mean, look at it. The NBA said, the NFL said they're going to pledge, $250 million? $250 million over 10 years? Over 10 years? That's less than $1 million per team?
Yeah.
Per year?
That's
like not a rookie? You know what I'm saying? Like that's a signing bonus, and they're going to write it off. So what does it really count for then?
No,
you know what I'm saying? That doesn't. Giving only matters when it costs you something. Giving is supposed to cost you something. That's what giving up.
Put your time and effort in. Put your time and effort in something. That's the thing about going to Baton Rouge is that, look, Louisiana. We know Louisiana is one of the worst states for African Americans when it comes to being locked up. You know, it's one of the worst states. If there's a state that needs justice reform, we're in it.
In the world. It's the worst.
In the world.
Nobody is more people in prison per capita than anywhere in the world. We're worse than communist dictatorships as far as the amount of people we have in prison. That's crazy.
David, I want to ask you, because I saw you on Twitter talking about this, and I think this is something that needs to be explained, and something that for someone who might not know, this is something where you can educate them. When you say giving money doesn't just throwing money doesn't help, what do you mean by that?
Because the money goes to organizations that deal with the daily issue. It's like you're buying cold medicine. That's what the money is. What does medicine do? What does cold medicine do? It masks the symptoms until you're well, right? That's what the money is. It's just masking the symptoms. We're not dealing with the pain. We're not dealing with the real causes of the infection. You know what I'm saying? I'm not trying to fix that part. I'm just putting the Band-Aid or the salve on top to make it not hurt as much. That's not what we need out of the money. The money is not good. Use the money for policy change. The people at the grassroots, if you want to spend some and donate to organizations, that's cool. But if you're not using it for policy change, then nothing changes. If you're not using it for electoral change, then nothing changes. That money will last until it's gone, and then we're going to ask for more money. You know what I'm saying? But if you fix the system, then people aren't asking because they're much more capable to do for themselves. And that's what people want. They want to not have to ask for your dollars to keep them alive. They want to be able to go out and earn their dollars and make their dollars, because now the system is much more of a leveled playing field. And that's all people want, not a guarantee of outcome. And see, I think that's the part too, is that the part of the divisiveness is that people keep trying to sell that I want an equal outcome. That is not what I want. That's not what any rational human being wants. What you want is an equal opportunity. I don't want your advantage to be simply because. And when you talk about white privilege and people don't get it, what white privilege boils down to is one thing. It's one thing. It's not that you get rich off of it or whatever. It's that the fact that you're white doesn't hurt you in America. That's the simple part of it. And being Black or being Hispanic or being Asian should not hurt you in America. Being white doesn't. Being any one of those other things does. And that's just, everything plays out and bears that out.
And I think when people realize that that's the message that most of us want that are fighting for this, they'll understand. And maybe they'll change in their hearts too, because at the end of the day, I think we all agree that we don't want someone to get an opportunity because they're of a minority. We want them to get in that opportunity because they work their butt off
and they're good at what they do.
They're really good at what they do, and they deserve that opportunity. Because at the end of the day, it's like going to a restaurant. If you're going to go to a restaurant, go to that restaurant, give them an opportunity. If it was a bad meal, give them a second opportunity, right? But at the end of the day, you're going to go back to that restaurant a third, a fourth, a fifth time if that food and that service was excellent.
Good, yeah.
And that's a good analogy for me.
And you got to go looking for it. Yeah, if you never look, if all you do is go to that same restaurant at the end of your block, and that's your palate, and that's that's basically what America. We just going to the same restaurant, dipping in the same talent pool all the time, and that hurts us all. It hurts business to not be developing that. Yeah, it hurts every waking part of life when you are leaving so many people out of the opportunity, when you are leaving so many people behind. You are losing out on innovators. You're losing out when they always apply this to abortion. And I don't want to make it political in that way, but you talk about, well, we could have lost the person who cured cancer. We're losing that kid now.
Yeah.
That kid is in school today. You know what I mean? Like that kid is starving at a school this fall and has been in Louisiana, and there are Black kids and there are white kids going through it too. But no one cares about that. You know what I'm saying? It's a lot easier to say, you're not working hard, or you're not doing this, when we know for a fact that Americans are working harder than ever. All Americans are working harder than they've ever worked for less money and less vacation time and all these things. We are working to sustain ourselves rather than working to build lives for ourselves. And that all that imbalance, on top of that, put race into it and those inequalities. We're ending up competing against each other when we should be trying to break that system down to something that works better for everyone. And that is not an equal outcome. Like, I have to emphasize that because I don't want people to confuse that for a moment.
Yeah.
But who my parents are should not determine for me the majority of how my life is. In America, we basically have a caste system, and the UN put out a report that we are on the same level as India. That if you are born poor, you are most likely to die poor. If you are born middle class, you are going to die middle class. And if you are born rich, you're going to stay rich. There is no movement.
I can even, and Charles knows this, I can attest to this because my parents had a certain amount of income, I was able to go to a better school than, say, my cousins whose parents didn't have a certain amount of income, and they were left to go to the school based upon their zip code, like we talked about earlier, and thus get a less quality level of education, which puts them at a lower playing field. And that's something that we see every day. And I want to ask you just real quick, how do you feel about the situation? Because we're talking about hiring the right man for the job and opening up that playing field. Do you feel that, because I do, I feel that the NFL, in the sense of saying hiring black coaches, if you give them a look, you'll get free draft picks. That shouldn't be why they hire these black coaches. They should hire them because they're talented and because they're the right people for the job, and they deserve it.
And the whole point of it is you're trying to convince people to do you're trying to pay somebody to do the right thing, which is evaluate talent properly. Because it would be different if they didn't keep moving the goalposts. Because they'll say, well, you need experience as a coordinator. And then you hire a coach who was working special teams for the Patriots and give him a head coaching job. You say, well, you need experience at this, and then you hire somebody out of the booth to be the manager of your baseball team. Or you need coaching experience. Well, Steve Kerr can go and coach. And Steve Kerr has proven he's a great coach. But I'm saying, don't tell me these are the guidelines to get here. And then every time I meet the guidelines, we still don't get hired.
Yep.
That makes no sense. Ownership has to make that shift mentally. You know what I'm saying? Ownership, if you cannot incentivize them enough to do it, because if you could, they would have already done it. It's their mindset. It has to change, and the players have to challenge it. The players have to start by challenging it, because look at how it goes in baseball in particular. Name a black manager in baseball who wasn't a great player. He had to be a great player, a Hall of Fame level all-star player for a black man to be a manager. Name one that wasn't. You know what I'm saying? Name one that was not at least an all-star. But name for me how many mediocre, players who became managers. The paths are not the same.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? You have to be the biggest thing that in life that you've made it is when your group of society has the right to be mediocre. And black people too often have to be exceptional, perfect to keep anything. You know what I'm saying? Like, you have to, when you go into it, if the minute you lose a game, they talking about firing you. And then you watch a guy like Jimbo Fisher, who got all the money in the world to be at Texas A&M, and they're no better than when he got there.
Facts.
They may have brought in all his talent. They're no better than when he got there. He won a championship at Florida State, but what did he do after that? He left that program in shambles. But he's going to get multiple chances. You know what I'm saying? But where did Ty Willingham go? Mm-hmm. Charlie Weis got 4 jobs. You know what I'm saying? Like, mediocrity is part of life too. Most people are average. But the problem is, if you're black, you ain't going to get a second chance to be average. But they'll recycle, and that's mindset. It has nothing to do with production. And it's the same for women who want to get into executive positions in sports. You telling me that men can coach women, men can administer women, but it can't happen the other way around?
Yep.
So it doesn't, we have to break these conventional mindsets of what we see when we close our eyes. And that's what it is. It's a lot. If I say, close your eyes and describe a judge, and somebody draws a picture, the chances are they're going to draw a white person. You know what I mean? Like that possibility for most people. If you say draw a president, the first one they're going to draw is probably a white person. And that's how you've been taught. You have to dismantle that thinking. It's the same way we are. Like I said, it's no different than sexism. There's a way we used to view women, and you had to unlearn the way you talked about women or the way you treated them. You have to unlearn that because society teaches you one thing, and that's progress. It's not a bad thing. It's not a bad thing to learn something and to adapt to make other people feel more comfortable.
Would sports be a good platform? I mean, everyone's talking about this country's having issues because there's no sports around. Wouldn't sports be a good place for change to occur? Because if it was normal to see a guy like the enemy as a head coach and see him succeed, then we would say, oh, well, in society, this is an opportunity for an African-American to get an opportunity at a company to succeed. I mean, if we could do it in sports, a place where people go to get away from issues in this world, and they see that it's normal there, you know?
They say that, but sports is inherently political.
Oh, it is. I mean,
always been political.
All entertainment at the end of the day is political, right?
But sports, sports in particular, but sports we hold in a different place than anything else. Because sports is the only public gathering where we play the national anthem.
Yep.
You know what I'm saying? So it's automatically you politicized it in that regard. Because if you're viewing it from the start as automatically you're looking to your left and looking to your right to see who's doing what. But again, you're making let's go back. I mean, once you start a league and you say, I'm banning these people from my league, you've made it political. Once Jack Johnson, who is, heavyweight champion of the world, gets arrested for transporting a white woman across state lines, you've made sports political. So Jackie Robinson is the father of the modern civil rights movement. Jesse Owens going over to beat Adolf Hitler and then having to come back home and run against horses to make a living is political. Joe Louis having to beat Max Scheller is political because Joe Louis was used to show that America was stronger than the Germans. So it's been political on the backs of black athletes for a long time. Curt Flood, you don't have free agency if Curt Flood doesn't basically sacrifice his life to make sure that there's free agency in baseball. You know what I'm saying? Like, you don't get every major movement that moved the sports world forward predominantly came from African-American athletes having to take on a suffering. You know what I mean? So
I guess my point is though, like, why can't in sports we see this be an opportunity for minorities to take ownership of companies? And it's hard to do that, right? But if we saw that there, it shouldn't just be the athletes, because I feel like
sports are the tool of the status quo. Sports are the tool of the status. That's why it's so important for certain people to get sports back on the field. It's because it reestablishes the status quo. Baseball and football are the arms of Americana now. You see what I'm saying? Like, football is America's passion. Baseball is America's pastime. And those are the two most rigid sports when it comes to change. They're the two most rigid sports when it comes to the type of ownership that it has. They're the most rigid sports when it comes to how they allow player expression. They're the most rigid sports in their unwritten rules. There's a reason that the NBA is more progressive, and it still has a long way to go. But the NFL has a value, and it trafficked in this. I mean, when you buy, when you get paid from the Department of Defense to stage things, to stage reunions with soldiers, you are part of the status quo. When 31 of 32 owners made significant contributions to Donald Trump, you are making political statements. You're telling me what you want in your league. So, I don't think that the structure is going to change until ownership changes, because the vast majority of owners are invested in keeping things the way they are.
Well, here's a question. Here's a question I have for you, David. In terms of it, like, we heard what you thought of how we can make change now, and I think this is more on a broader, looking at a broader. Can't think of the word, but broader picture, right? Mm-hmm. In terms of having a conversation, amongst my friends, Lynden amongst his friends, how can we progress change so that we all as a community can create change here and then hopefully create it on that broader picture?
I think the first part is that for white Americans at this time, the most important thing that you can do is listen. That's the first thing is, are you going to listen first and be receptive to what we're telling you is our pain and our struggle? If you come into it as saying, I want to rebut, then it's not gonna, we can't have that kind of conversation. You know what I mean? It's like, if you have a significant other, if you're your girlfriend, your wife, whatever, you know, like the whole thing is, if I piss off my wife, I better listen. You know what I mean? Yeah. It's not a two-way conversation at the start. If she's hurt, I'm going to listen, and she's got to tell me what's going on, and then we're going to fix it from there. And I think that's the first thing, is that it has to be in some ways at the beginning one-sided, because America has not listened to the whole story. They've not let us get it all out and say it. And so until that part happens, until the first part of the conversation of hearing the uncomfortable truth and then asking about it in sincerity, you know, that's the whole point, is like, if you're not sincerely interested in this engagement, if you're coming from a point where I have to prove it to you, if I have to prove my humanity, there's no amount of conversation we're going to have. I cannot convince you. But if you're coming from a perspective is, I'm trying to understand and I don't right now, then we can have that conversation and you can affect change. But you got to remember, there are just going to be some people you got to let go.
Yep.
You can't yell at a brick wall, man. So some people you're going to have to cut loose. And that's a hard part in this, but that's how you affect change too. And like you said, there are consequences for free speech, and there are consequences in relationships. I've had to change relationships with people because of what they've said to me on as their real truth thoughts about this whole situation. And that has to happen sometimes. It has to be painful for both people, because I can't accept tacitly on my end being ignored, and I can no longer accept the friendship, quote unquote, of someone who really doesn't see me. So, I mean, that part of the pain has to be painful. We will never get over it until we go through the pain.
Because we've been putting Band-Aids on it forever, and it's like, it's time to rip that Band-Aid off. Man, David, I want to thank you for coming on and giving us such an insightful conversation. Tell the people where they can find you on social media.
At DM Grubb on Twitter and Instagram. And we're going to be relaunching my website, hitpwithdg.com. And I ain't going nowhere. I'll be back creating content real soon. I got an article dropping tomorrow on thebirdrights.com.
Go buy some merchandise.
Yeah, man.
Those Pelican shirts are awesome. Pelicans are coming back. David. Go get one of those shirts, y'all.
Real quick before we get you out of here, I know how you felt about the NBA coming back and how you didn't want them per se to come back because of the message at hand. How do you feel about the Pelicans going into this Orlando bubble experiment?
They got a puncher's chance, and that's all you can ask for. I think they got to go 6-2 at least to get to that 8-9 game, and I think that that's possible. I certainly do with the schedule that they have. So I think they've got a puncher's chance as long as they. The hard thing is, I have no idea how anybody's going to respond to this mentally. Yeah, that is the hardest thing. So everything is we're taking on the supposition of everything being equal, which we have no idea on what that is right now. But all things being equal, I would say the Pelicans have as good a chance as anybody. But once you make the postseason, I think it's completely up in the air, because I have no idea how people's bodies are going to respond. I have no idea if anybody's going to get infections.
Yeah.
And I'll tell you this, the biggest thing is going to be how honest our players and people go be if the wrong person gets sick at the wrong time.
Oh.
Yeah. Oh,
if it's Game 7 and LeBron got corona,
he's gonna play, and we've seen that with Kevin Durant. That's how Kevin Durant got injured at Golden State. That's something that's gonna happen.
Are they gonna tell him?
Yeah, not
if
to
his
play.
test comes up positive before Game 7 of the NBA Finals? Do you think the NBA is gonna pull LeBron James from a championship game?
I don't, and I know Charles doesn't.
Hey, and we know Glass Bones Anthony Davis is going to get corona at some point too in this too.
Look at this guy. Thank you so much, David. Thank you.
And Ruffles have ridges, man. He's thick now. Ruffles got ridges.
Oh, man.
Charles, tell the people where they can find you on social media.
Y'all can find the Primetime Podcast at primetime_pod. Hopefully we'll be doing some content soon as LSU's getting a lot more recruits. But hey, man, we're going to continue this conversation we're having here, and hopefully we can get David back, because this is a platform to inspire and hopefully create change. And if we can do that with one person, then we've made a difference in this world.
100%. And like I said in the beginning of the show, I'm going to say this again here because I think this is the perfect moment. Let me pull it up. Because like Charles said something that stuck with me last time, how we wanted to fight for change and we didn't do it. I'm taking action. July 11th and August 15th, those are the election dates in Louisiana. If you have someone that you know needs a ride in the Acadiana area, we are chauffeuring people to the polls those 2 days. Give me a contact on Facebook, Twitter, or you can email us at all caps broswhothink@outlook.com. Send us in your number, send us in the person's information, and we will pick them up and bring them to the polls in the Acadiana area only. If you're listening to New Orleans, I can't help you out. I'm sorry, but in the Acadiana area on July 11th and August 15th, we will be driving people to the polls.
And anybody who's got access to a computer, you can go to the Secretary of State's website, Louisiana Secretary of State's website, and find out if your polling place is still open. Don't wait till election day, because the polling places can change every year. And we've already seen in multiple cities, people having to wait out in line for 6, 7, 8 hours to vote. Find out your polling place real quick.
Hey, and voting's open right now for early voting. Don't forget, you can go out and vote when you have the opportunity to now.
Yes,
so
it is.
Go get it done.
David, say that website again so they can know, please, and I want to know, because that's important.
It's I want to say it's la.sos.gov. I want to say that's what it is, but I'm not sure. But it's certainly just type in Louisiana Secretary.
Yeah, and Google that.
I mean, that's who runs the elections, Louisiana Secretary.
100%. Again, July 11th, August 15th are the Louisiana elections. If you want someone to drive, contact us, and we will get you a ride to the polls in the Acadiana area. Thank you, David, so much for coming on the pod. Let's finish up this show with Bros Who Ball.